Good afternoon and welcome to the Monday, December 15th, 2008 informational meeting of the City of Sioux Falls. First, I'd like to call this meeting to order. I have a brand new gavel, so I'm going to drop it. First order of business is we have a City Council staff report with updates from Deborah A. Owen, City Clerk.
Thank you and good afternoon, Sioux Falls City Council. If I could, just to begin on item number 17 on tonight's agenda. This is a deferred action coming back to the council, has to do with Sanford land. At the request of Councilmember Anderson Jr., we had received some updates from the planning department, so he wanted us to kind of roll through that with you in the maps that were sent over. As it stands now, item 17 has an amendment coming, so you'll be asked to amend that by planning. If you could see the map, maybe on the overhead, I don't know if it'll come through on your TVs at this point, but there are 3 properties that are requesting to be removed from the ordinance that is before you now. That is 812 Southwest Avenue. That's Diane Heavey, Amy Towser, if I'm pronouncing that right. I hope I am. Anyway, at 816 Southwest Avenue, and Elizabeth Hubner at 1412 West 17th Street. And then also there's one more map, which will bring it into context for you. I believe that blue section at the top inside the circle, I guess you could call it. Anyway, the outline of that neighborhood area is where those properties lie, to give you some bearing as to what's going to happen tonight on item number 17.
Deb, can I ask you a question about that map?
Sure.
I got a phone call from a constituent who was wondering about the other line, the black line. Do you know what that is by any chance?
You know, I'm going to, this came from David Loveland in planning, so I'm going to defer to Cooper if he may be able to answer that.
Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services. Whenever we do a rezoning exhibit or a conditional use exhibit, we include a line that's a 600-foot buffer, and that was done at the request of City Council some time ago. So all that shows is a 600-foot area around the boundaries of the property that's being considered for action.
Oh, I guess I'm wondering, though, there's that, maybe we're not talking about the same line, that one that kind of bulges out over there on the east. What?
Do you have a pointer? Okay. You're talking about this property?
Oh, no, the curve, yes, that.
Yeah, that's that 600-foot buffer that surrounds the boundaries of the current Sanford Plan Development District, as well as the proposed extension.
Okay.
So this internal line is the current boundaries of their Plan Development District, and then up here on the north is what the City Council will be considering tonight.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Brown.
So what's the net effect if those properties, if the council chooses to take those out of the planned development district?
We, and again, I can go through this tonight at the hearing, but we put this map together in working with the neighborhood and with Sanford Medical that would allow existing residential uses to continue. But we also try to make it clear in working with the neighborhood that any property owner that wanted to be excluded could be excluded. And we weren't notified by these property owners until after the Planning Commission and actually after first reading. So there really is no negative impact tonight of excluding those, and we are not opposed to excluding those.
Mr. Anderson and Mr. Staggers.
Mike, similar to the one on the north, you have that small section there on the east in the middle of the map there?
Right here?
Right there.
Yeah.
How are they doing that zoning there? It just seems like they're taking a small area and zoning it. What happens to the rest of that block there? It seems like the one there between, would that be like Waltz Avenue there?
Yep.
Where they sort of jumped across the street and they have one little area rezoned, and then on the west side there, they've got another little area. What happens to those property values of those homes that are still there that aren't haven't sold or haven't been offered yet?
They're going to be allowed to continue just like they have been. There's really no change to the property owners. And I guess I would really feel more comfortable having this discussion at a public hearing, but I think two things that I'll talk about tonight is that the zoning does not have an impact on property taxes, and it does not have an impact on that the hospital can force somebody to sell their property. We had those same kind of discussions when the city council approved some zoning changes farther to the east. And we've had those kind of discussions over time with both of the hospitals when they've wanted to expand their boundaries.
Okay, and the reason I guess I'm asking is I've heard some residents over there that are a little concerned about the way that, the purchases and the zoning has been done over there.
And again, I'll be prepared to address that tonight.
Okay.
Mike, I'd like to request that if we got a map, and I know all these lots in this neighborhood very well, but I think I could see where it would be confusing to somebody, because one part is established, shown here as lots that actually has the north center on it, and if we could have streets actually listed on there, I think that would help not cause confusion with some of the general public. Mr. Staggers, did you have one more?
Yeah, Mike, I just have one final question. What is the purpose of having the 600-foot zone there? What does that do, or
It just shows,
why not 800 or 500 or 400 or?
I asked the staff today why we showed a 600-foot, and we really didn't. It was based on a city council request some time ago. By city ordinance, the people that are within 250 feet are eligible to protest. Okay, I know what it is. I can answer the question. By city ordinance, if there's any parks or schools within 600 feet, then they have to be notified about the rezoning in addition to the neighborhood meetings. So that's why the 600-foot buffer is shown. I just had to remember that.
Mike, wasn't our old average street length, or block length, about 300 feet?
This
So
would
that'd be
be
two
about 2
blocks away
blocks.
from.
Yep. And I know that there's people that have seen these maps that show the two lines, and they're concerned that this outer line is the ultimate expansion, and that's just not the case at all. So tonight, all that we're considering is this property up here on the north side.
Yeah.
Mr. Staggers.
I guess
one more.
if tonight, if you could say something about that 600
Yes.
foot, because there is this map circulating, and people are saying, look at all this that's going on here.
I intended to do that tonight.
I think after tonight with Sanford, there's going to be a lot of questions cleared up, a lot of information that probably should have been put out, but I look forward to taking care of a lot of that tonight.
I hope so, on a nice cold night.
Yes. Anything else of Mr. Cooper? Very good, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And then on to item number 18, which is actually will be a request to defer that. That is the order of business of the council. I just wanted to review kind of where we are with the amendments. There was the original meeting where the council was asked to add the word report of the notice of transfers of appropriations, and then subsequently, if we could, from last Friday, there were 2 more amendments out there. One would be to add under the consent, acceptance of the report of the notice of transfer of appropriations. And then there was another amendment by the city attorney, and that would be to just simply move that report to the regular item, regular agenda as item number 13, which is already in place. It's the report of office boards, commissions, committees, and then the notice of transfers of appropriations. So just so you know, there's a number of amendments out there. Some are proposed by the city attorney. As you can see, prior to that would have been, I think, Costello, and then the original one about adding the report was mine from a director's meeting 2 weeks ago. And I think, again, that there's a request to defer that by the administration for further discussion, but just wanted to give you an update on that one. Moving on inside Town Hall, I know we had talked earlier a week ago that we would be delaying those inside Town Hall tapings as Reed Holson has taken a position with the Human Resources Department. On January 1st on January 2nd, there has been requests already out there from Anderson Jr. and Staggers. So we have the first available will be January 16th, at 12:15 and 12:30. So if those of you who would like to be a part of that taping, please let me know, and we can move forward with that. Thank you.
Any questions of Ms. Owen?
Also, just to touch and kind of catch you up on districting commission, that's something that I sent you in the memo. And just wanted to let you look at, this is the current map as it is today. You can see the different boundaries are in color. Councilmember Litz's, which is the northwest, is that orangey kind of taupe looking on this camera anyway. Blue would be Councilmember Anderson Jr.'s. Councilmember Staggers would be the yellow, which is the central. And then Councilmember Benegas would be the green, location on the southeast of the city. And then southwest would be Councilmember Jameson. That is how it is today. As you know, I sent you some numbers where some are high and low in terms of our 5% average population. And so there's some changes that need to occur. There are two maps right now that are being looked at more seriously by the commission, and so I wanted to bring those forward at this time. This one has made a few adjustments. You can see the Whittier neighborhood has been added to Central, and they've also taken a portion of, I think it would be southwest area, and added that to Central as well. Obviously, Central needs to grow, and the others, I think the northeast needs to grow, southwest needs to shrink. So there's one more, though, and I wanted you to see it now in case you begin to have questions of the commission. This one's a little bit different. As you know, in the ordinances, the districts are named now northwest, northeast, central, southwest, southeast by ordinance. This would pose the central would go right up from the central up north, and that one's a lot of a change being proposed by the commission. I think there's about 16 precincts that would change with that map. So I wanted to give you that heads up. Council will have the ability next year, when it comes before you in a report, you have 21 days to either accept or reject whatever plan comes before you. You can send that back to the commission with your findings if you would like them to reconsider the map. This one, again, and Sue Roust, I think, had mentioned in the meeting, too, that this is a kind of a radical change where we had just a few precincts changing before. This one actually has a substantial change, and certainly changes are identifying the districts as we know them today. So that's just to give you an update on that item. In addition, just to let you know, we have the Breakfast Club meeting this Wednesday, but they won't have the legislators attending, so we have sent out a letter along with a copy of your legislative agenda to all of those, signed by the council member chair and vice chair. And so that went out to them, or is going out to them this week on your behalf. And then I know Dee is absent, but I wanted to give you an update too regarding the Audit Committee. The next appointment for the Audit Committee will be in February of 2009. It's Brad Witzel's seat, and he can serve a total of 2 terms. He's only served 1 thus far, so it may likely be a reappointment, but I wanted to give you that heads up so that you all knew that was coming up before you. And then lastly, just so you know, there was some questions. There's an executive order that came through, very large, had a number of the departments on there. This is the mayor's mechanism to put the COLA, that 3% COLA, in place. The council does that by resolution. You'll see your resolutions on January 5th in our next official council meeting for you to take action on. Any questions?
Any questions of Deborah? Ms. Owen, I do have a question here, and this has confounded me since I've gotten on the council, and that's the Audit Committee, because we actually have 2 audit committees that you would call the Audit Committee, and one of them would be the one that's made of the CPAs, Mr. Costello notwithstanding, and then the other one that belongs to the City Council, the Audit Committee. And sometimes I think when we talk about them, I know I become confused and have to think about it, and I can't imagine that the general public wouldn't share that sentiment as well. Is there some way we can delineate between the 2 of these?
Well, I guess I'm only aware of the Audit Committee that's composed of 3 CPAs and 2 council members by ordinance. That's a function of the council. That's part of your function in charter. You have the ability for external to authorize external auditors and the auditing function. And so that that resides with the council. What the council has done early on, when they had adopted the ordinance before I even came on board, was to make sure that those actual individual audits, when they're conducted, are done by those who have that professional background, who understand the internal audit function. So when those reports come up to the auditing committee, the only one that I'm aware of anyway, those folks look at it and with their professional background and determine whether that audit has been done well, or if it needs to be tweaked a little bit, and then it comes on to the council. But it's always been the council's committee. It's just that you have an independence there when it comes to the actual audits. But it's still your employees, still your budget, still your
Are
committee.
we talking about Rich here? Rich and his?
Yes.
Okay, and then how about last week, we put a new fellow on the audit
Yes.
committee?
Mr.
Yes.
Joe Marsh.
Okay, is he part of the council's function then? Or
Yes.
I thought those guys were independent of the council, totally independent of the council.
No, well, they can't be totally independent of the council in the sense that, I mean, you have like a dotted line. I'll show you the org chart sometime, but for the council's authority to have audits or have that auditing function, like the legislature has the legislative audit, and that is a subordinate group to the legislature in peer. The audit committee also is subordinate to the council. It's your committee. However, there is that caveat in ordinance where the council wanted to make sure that those audits were done with a real integrity, to make sure the audit function stayed true and there wasn't a lot of politicizing of the actual audit being done.
Okay, but I guess I'm still confused here, maybe just because I haven't been on the audit committee. Rich and the council people that are on the audit committee, that's a committee, is that correct?
That is a committee of the
Okay.
council.
Okay, and then the gentleman who we put on last week, that was with U.S. Bank, and we
Yes.
put him on, is he on that committee as well with the other?
Yes, Mr. Joe Marsh was replacing Paul Ryder, who
Yes,
was a CPA who was
yes.
coming
Now,
off the
okay,
committee.
then when the audit committee meets, do all those people meet as well?
The audit committee, which consists of those 3 CPAs, now it's Joe Marsh, it's Brad Witzel, and Ann Oppegard, and then you have Councilmember Costello and Councilmember Jameson. That's your audit committee, and when they meet, all of them meet together, along with internal audit and myself.
Very good. Any other questions of Ms. Owen? Seeing none, thank you, Deborah, for that. Item number 4, or item number 3 is from the mayor's office. Is anybody from the mayor's office? Seeing none, then we will go on to item number 4, and that is our audit committee, the chair of the audit committee.
No report.
No report from Mr. Costello. Okay, fiscal committee, number 5. Gerald?
No report.
No report from the fiscal committee. Number 6, land use committee. Mr. Jameson?
No report.
No report. Very good. Number 7, public services. Mr. Anderson?
Last meeting last week was canceled due to other council business and was rescheduled for January.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Number 8 is city council open discussion. Is there anything for the greater good to be brought forward today? Councilman Staggers?
Yes, I've received a number of concerns about the recent snow emergency that we had with the ticketing of, 1,200 vehicles or so. And I guess probably one of the reasons why I've heard about this is because around the colleges, we had a lot of tickets being issued. And I remember one comment that was made by a faculty member who got a ticket who said, the street he was parked on, he thought that it didn't even need plowed. And because by that time, there was not much snow to begin with, but by that time, the snow was pretty much packed it down, and he didn't feel that he should have gotten the ticket. But he did go ahead and pay it anyway. But I did have a number of people that have got tickets.
Very good, Mr. Staggers. Mr. Anderson?
I wanted to let you know that the site committee for the working with the county on the selection of a homeless building has been finalized, and they should be making an announcement in the near future on that.
Very good. Questions of Mr. Anderson on that? Seeing none?
Can I ask, I guess, is it a new building, an old building, or can you give us some insight as to?
Actually, the county already had some property and just finalized the purchase of another section, and they'll be announcing that. So it will be, there's existing buildings on the property right now that are actually being used at this time for the same purpose. I believe you visited one of those buildings, so that is the area.
Oh, okay.
But the rest of the announcement, I'll leave that up to the county.
Thanks.
But I can send you some emails that I've received that will show you some ideals.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anything else? Very good. Then we're going to move into our presentations, and the first one is Tracy Vick is down here today to visit us from the Staff Development Coordinator from the Sioux Falls School District, and she is going to give us a report on the impact of poverty in our community. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you, Vernon Brown, for inviting me to be here and present this information. About 5 years ago, we were looking at the demographics of the Sioux Falls School District and the community of Sioux Falls. And Dr. Pam Holman looked at the increasing number of poverty kids coming to school from a background of poverty and said we needed to look a little deeper into this, which is happening. And we not only have looked then at our kids coming to school hungry, are they coming to school with a full night's sleep, are they coming to school with the proper clothing or winter gear, but not only that, then how does this impact of poverty affect our community as well? And so we've been doing a lot of training in the school district, but also then with the Department of Labor and the City of Sioux Falls and some other folks as well, about looking at what is this impact and how is it changing in Sioux Falls. An important thing to know is that poverty is one of the most powerful predictors of the difficulties that a child will face growing up, and it's a predictor in how effective they're going to be as a productively employed adult. Some things to always remember is that poverty is present in all areas of diversity. Every religious group, every ethnic group, nobody is exempt from poverty. It exists in all regions of the United States, and with this information that I share is based on the research of Dr. Ruby Payne, Rita Pearson, Paul Slocum, but also we looked at the U.S. Census Bureau, and we've done a lot of studying just here in Sioux Falls. When we went off to be trained in understanding poverty from Dr. Ruby Payne, the first time we came back and had a meeting with some of our Sioux Falls administrators, we told all Ruby Payne stories. After that first meeting and going into the second training, we had Sioux Falls School District stories because we have enough examples that are right here alive and in Sioux Falls that we didn't need to use the ones from other regions. But also know that even with this study, there's always exceptions to any rule. So when we talk about some of the hidden rules in a little bit, we want you to understand that there's always exceptions, and we're not saying people from poverty always act this way, people from middle class always act this way, or people from wealth act in a particular way either. One fact that we got from the Children's Defense Fund is that a child is born into poverty in South Dakota every 4 hours. So that was pretty shocking to me when I saw that. Some key thoughts on poverty is that poverty is relative. If everybody around you makes the same wage as you do, nobody's different. But if we took our current wages that we have right now and we moved to a refugee camp in the Sudan, we probably all would be considered wealthy. Even though there's a broad range of income levels here, we'd all probably be considered wealthy. But if we took those same salaries that we currently make and we moved to downtown Manhattan, probably we'd be in lower middle class or maybe even in poverty. Generational and situational poverty are very different. Generational poverty means that I live in poverty, my parents lived in poverty, and my grandparents lived in poverty. The prospects of a child from generational poverty ever getting out of poverty themselves is only 20%, but we can help them through that. Situational poverty can happen to any one of us. That means maybe you're a two-income family and you're suddenly divorced and you're a one-income family. Possibly you have something, a tornado take out your home and you don't have life or house insurance, house insurance. You have one income in your family is no longer able to work, maybe. So situational and generational poverty are extremely different, and situational poverty can happen to just about anybody. The individuals bring with them the hidden rules of the class in which they were raised, and this is really important to know because schools and businesses are based on middle-class rules and norms because most of the people who own those businesses or run those schools are from middle class. We wanted to give you a little bit of the demographics of Sioux Falls, which all of you know our city very well, but it's important in the work that all of us do as a school district or the city. We have roughly 57,967 households in the city of Sioux Falls. Of those, 3,280 are living on less than $10,000 a year. You can see the demographics of 10,000 to 15,000, 15,000 to 25,000, and 25 to 34,000. So 36% of our households in Sioux Falls are living on less than $35,000 a year, or 21,000 of those. Important factor in knowing this is that a family of four, that we base our free and reduced lunch based on a family of four earning an annual income of $33,000. So that kind of tells you 36% of those families would be making that amount of money and qualify for free and reduced lunch. One thing I wanted to show you is the trend in the Sioux Falls School District over the last 20 years. In 1988, we had about 22% of our kids on free and reduced lunch. As of the end of November in 2008, we're up to 35%, excuse me. So that trend has increased 13%. But the one shocking factor in that is that, if you will notice, the reduced number has gone up only very minimally, but the free number has gone up significantly, which means that kids are living on less and less. Those household incomes are less now than what they were even 20 years ago. Some of our demographics of the percent of the population receiving free and reduced lunch. In our white population, 23% of those are receiving free and reduced lunch. Our Asian population are 42%. Our black population is 79%. Our Hispanic population is 78%. And our Native American population is 79%. Another demographic that's often shocking to some folks is the number of children we have with at least one parent incarcerated. This year, we have over 1,200 students in Sioux Falls that have at least one parent in prison. 150 of these children are in 9 of the Sioux Falls public schools that participate in a weekly support group that's help funded by the United Way. 89% of the students in this Children's Connection program are from a background of poverty. The homeless number in Sioux Falls, and I know we've been hearing a lot about this in the media lately, but as of yesterday, the number was up to 701 K through 12 students. And that's identified by the McKinney-Vento standards, which means it's children living in a situation that is not meant to be permanent housing. They may be living out in the deluxe motel out on West 12th Street. They might be living in their vehicles. They might be doubled up. At one time last year when we were making some deliveries to a home, we had 12 children living in a 2-bedroom apartment. They were from a couple of different families, but they were all living together in the same place. And so as over the course of last year, during the entire school year, we identified 820 students as homeless, and as of yesterday, we identified 701 this year. So that is a huge increase for us. Some things to know about some of the hidden rules that I'm going to talk to you about are that they're seldom articulated, yet they're equated with intelligence. You know, if any of you watched the movie Pretty Woman and watched Julia Roberts go into situations where she was eating in a situation she didn't know what to do with all those forks and knives, some of us can feel like we're in those situations ourselves. You throw me in the financial world, that is not my bag, and I don't understand necessarily. That doesn't mean I'm not an intelligent person. It's just that's not what my background is. And so one thing that we really need to keep in mind is that they never should be equated with a person's intelligence. It's just their experiences might be in different areas. So some of the things we feel that are really important for people to understand is that in poverty, the present is the very most important. Decisions are made for the moment. This can greatly affect how kids are educated and how people are out there in the workforce as well. If the present is most important and I'm faced with a decision, should I stay home because we had some unexpected guests come in, or should I go to work? Well, sometimes if the present is most important and we don't think about what the future ramifications are, I will skip work today, not realizing or thinking about the fact that I might not have a job tomorrow. Decisions are made for the moment. That's really important for us to know as we work with people from a background in poverty. In middle class, the future is most important. You know, we start planning for our children's college funds the moment we find out that they're on the way. We plan for bigger homes and we plan for our future. Decisions are made against future ramifications. Let's think about the decision that we make now before we go off and do whatever the thing is. Wealth, traditions, and past history are most important. Decisions are made partially on the basis of tradition or decorum. Anytime you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. I taught 6th grade for a lot of years, so I'm used to interruptions. Some of the hidden rules of poverty in terms of possessions, and this is the biggest misnomer I believe that is out there. For people in poverty, the most important possession are other people, are their family members. And there are people out there who do not care about their kids, but they can be in poverty, middle class, or wealth. And about 5 years ago, I was standing in line at a Walmart, and in front of me was a mom, and she had 3 little kids. They were clean. They were busy, though. They were well behaved, but they were busy. They were all 3 toddlers. And behind me was quite possibly one of the most impatient men I'd ever met. And I'm glad to say it was none of you. I don't recognize the faces at all. But she was busy, and she had a food stamp card, and so she was paying for all of her food items. But then she needed to pay for the diapers and the paper towels and the laundry detergent with cash. So she was keeping her kids under control, rustling through her billfold, trying to get the money. And meanwhile, the gentleman kept tapping his foot and giving the sigh because he obviously was in a big hurry. And when she turned to give her money to the clerk, it was very clear she was pregnant. And so baby number 4 was on its way. And this gentleman behind me said, loud enough for her to hear and the clerk to hear and many other people to hear, "Good God, hasn't she figured out how that happens yet?" And at that time, I was appalled. But as I've done this research, I'm even more appalled today because to her, those children were hers. They were her babies, they were her possessions, and they meant the world to her, and she was taking good care of them. We had a parent walk into a principal's office a few years ago and say, "You know what, the landlord owns my house, rent-own owns my TV and VCR, and the bank owns my car, but by God, I own those kids, and I'll own them till the day I die." And she was right. As long as she's taking care of her children, nobody's going to take them away from her. You know, I can lose my job, I can lose my house, I can lose my car, but if I take care of these kids and I love them, nobody's going to take them away. They are the constant for me. And sometimes that is one of the misconceptions. They must not care about their kids. Otherwise, they'd have better clothes, they'd have a better job, they'd have a better vehicle, they'd have a better house. In middle class, folks tend to value things. We got lots of things. You know, in the 70s, you had to have a 1-car garage. In the 80s, you had to have a 2. And right now, if you don't have a 3-car garage, you're in trouble. And oftentimes, there's nothing but things in that 3rd stall. In wealth, it's one-of-a-kind objects, legacies, and pedigrees. The hidden rules of food. In poverty, quantity is the most important. Did you have enough? Middle class, quality is important. Did you like it? And in wealth, presentation is important. Was it presented well? So that's kind of an interesting tidbit to throw in there. Driving forces. In poverty, one of the key driving forces for them is survival. And relationships. Relationships matter the most about whether people like me or not, if I'm going to fit in or not. And entertainment. And sometimes folks are judgmental on folks with entertainment. They don't have a backpack, and they might not have warm winter coats, or they might not have a very nice house, but by George, they've got a big screen TV, or the kids got the PlayStation 2. And if they're making those decisions, as we learned, based on split-minute decisions and not thinking about future ramifications, sometimes folks will go down to a rental store and pay twice as much for a TV, but they can pay for it $25 a week. Or their kids will have that when they don't have the backpack, or they don't have some of those other things they need. But entertainment will take you away from the situation you're in right now. And so entertainment is very, very important. And in the workplace and in schools, those class clowns, and we have them in the workplace as well, and sometimes it's not always appropriate. But that entertainment, it's important to know that sometimes their value is if you can make people laugh. In middle class, the driving forces are work, achievement, and material security. And in wealth, it's politics, finances, and social connections. So an important thing to know out of the information that we're sharing today is to survive in poverty, one must rely upon their nonverbal, sensory, and reactive skills. But to survive in work and school, one must use verbal, abstract, and proactive skills, and those things are totally different. So what does it mean for us as we work with people from poverty? We need to be careful not to make assumptions about an individual's intelligence. Understanding the hidden rules of poverty will lessen any anger and frustration service providers may feel when they're working with folks from poverty. And we must keep in mind that people in poverty don't always believe that they are poor. I was raised in a very poor situation and didn't realize it until I was much older, and you reflect back upon the fact that maybe you didn't have a stove or a refrigerator for a year or so. But if everybody around you was in the same situation, it didn't really notice that it was any different. I knew I was clean. I knew I was loved. And so we need to remember those when we're working with people from poverty. We can also should look at and focus on the hidden rules before we dispense advice or seek solution for others, because sometimes what seems like such a realistic thing, you have health insurance, why don't you go to the doctor? But a $25 copay can mean a lot to somebody from poverty. That could mean food on the table, it could mean a warm coat for their child. And so what seems common sense to one group may not even be workable for another group. We need to recognize that the challenges that other people face and help people from poverty overcome them. The two biggest things that help one move out of poverty are education and relationships. No significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. This is something that we absolutely stress with our teachers, because if we can keep kids in school, the likelihood of them becoming a productively employed adult are higher than if they're a dropout. And if we can get them to a VOTEC school, if we can get them to some training, post-secondary training, if we can get them into college, that likelihood increases and increases. Some of our schools right now that we look at, like Hawthorne, the number is over 80% of the kids on free and reduced lunch. But when you're a kid from poverty and you walk into Hawthorne, you are just like everybody else. It's important for the people at John Harris with 9% poverty or Robert Frost with 17% poverty to understand what kids from poverty are coming from too. Because when a kid from poverty walks into one of those schools, they're one of a very few. And those teachers need to understand where those kids are coming from, the resources that they have socially, physically, and emotionally at home, and how to work with them as well. I do have a little bit. This is like the minute version. They gave me 15 minutes. I hope I'm pretty close to time, Denise, but if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Councilor Brown.
Tracy, I just want to, since I did get to see your presentation before, I want to thank you for coming. I appreciate what the school district does between you and Wendy Giebink and the information that you provide to us. It's very helpful, and this is probably the most non-judgmental I've ever seen a presentation done on poverty and homelessness, and I really appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Councilor Staggers.
Yeah, I was just curious about the demographics in the Sioux Falls School District with 35% receiving free or reduced lunches. What is the income level on if you can get a reduced lunch?
$33,000 for a family of 4.
Oh, I thought that was poverty.
I said that's what we were basing those numbers on in this district. When we say you're from a background of poverty, we're saying that you're on free and reduced lunch.
Oh,
But the
okay.
national
Oh,
statistics are much, much lower.
Okay.
The income level is about $17,000, but
For a,
that,
for a family of 4?
yeah, that's not even
Yeah, that's not
realistic
very
here.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councilor Benega.
Excuse me, Tracy, on your 6th slide, you talk about Sioux Falls demographics. And one of the things that I have a question about is, do you have any information that breaks that down by family size or age group by chance?
We can get that off the U.S. Census Bureau. And we did get that information. We re-looked at it today again. But it does break it down, like if it's a single mother home, if there's anyone over 18, more than one person over 18 working, and the information is all out there, and I can certainly get that to you if you'd like.
Would you please?
I would.
Thank you.
Councilor Anderson.
Could, on part of that, I guess, would you add how many of these households are two-income households? Okay.
Councilor Jameson.
Tracy, did you say there were 701 students,
K through 12.
K through 12, in the Sioux Falls School District? How does that relate to the rest of the state? Do you have any idea just how?
There are established homeless ed programs in Sioux Falls and in Rapid City, and our numbers are I have not compared them to Rapid City as of yet, but in the past, they have been, Rapid City has a higher number usually than what we do, but their homeless ed is structured in such a different way that the services they can provide are very different than what ours are.
Okay, and you'd mentioned, I think I got it out of your presentation, that education is the number one way that these people can move out of poverty,
And building relationships, yes.
building relationships. And what is it that the school district is doing to keep those opportunities open for these people who are struggling to even get to school,
Right.
to get home from school?
Well, a couple of the different things that we're doing is making sure that if a child the research shows that if a child changes school buildings, so like we're in the Hawthorne area and then we move to Terry Redland area and then we move, every time a child moves schools, they lose 3 to 6 months of academic growth. And so one of the things we piloted a few years ago and are still doing are providing transportation for those kids that do move from one school to the next. But that it's at a very high cost. But that's something that we have started doing in the school district. And there are other things, like some of it's with taxi cabs and things like that, making sure those kids get to school if they're in a place where there's not a bus route there.
Just one more question.
Okay.
Is there, I appreciate the presentation, but is there something that you need from us that we can do to help you, or are you just kind of bringing us up to speed, or?
I'm bringing you up to speed, but also Dr. Holman invited me to the city, county, and school elected officials, just because she wanted folks to have that information a couple of months ago, I believe it was, right? And she wanted the folks to, because we have to look at it as a community. The school district can work hard on working with families from poverty, or the city could work hard, but if we don't work together, or the county, we're going to get twice as far if we can work together.
Thank you.
Councilor Brown.
And Councilor Jameson, maybe to answer even more of that, the school district has been very good about partnering with nonprofit agencies too, such as the backpack program that sends food home. That really grew out of the school district saying there's a huge need here for children that are going hungry on weekends. Also, community outreach, which pays one-time rent, mortgage, utilities for families that are on the brink of homelessness because of situations going on in their lives. The school district, and specifically Dr. Holman, are partnering up there, trying to bring forth a Genesis program that churches will adopt families and teach them how to get out of poverty. So those kind of partnerships have been valuable. And if you could share maybe Dr. Holman's comments from that day about how torn up she is when she has to decide whether there should be school, for example, today on a cold day, why she struggles with that decision. I think it'd be important for the council to hear that.
One thing she shared that day, and she shared since then, is that the fact when we don't have school. Those kids aren't getting a warm breakfast, and they're not getting a warm lunch. And we know that schools do provide that for the kids. And that's a really difficult decision, because some of those kids, school's the safest, warmest place that they have in their day.
Thanks, Tracy.
Well, Tracy, I too would like to thank you. That was a very sobering presentation that you made. And I too grew up in a neighborhood where we were all poor, and I don't think any of us knew it because we had nothing to compare it to. I do recall, though, one time we used to take the tour down at Morell's. It started at 1 o'clock, and the first 15 minutes what they would do is take you through the hot dogs and the cold meat selection, and you could duck out the door. And so sometimes I'd go down there for a snack, but I showed some kids on the east side that, and they went down there repeatedly to go down there to eat lunch because there was nothing at home. So, the poverty thing's always been there. I guess it's shocking to me a little bit more as I grow older. But, Kenny was talking about, Mr. Jameson was talking about, the school district being proactive in this. And part of my district is an older district. You mentioned Hawthorne. That's where I went to school when it was sitting up on top of the hill there. It was an old ramshackle of a two-story building back then. But I'm aware that we've got 2 school sites left in the Sioux Falls School District, and then we are built out. Is that correct? From your knowledge, maybe you don't know that, but I think that's correct. Which leaves us with the older buildings in the central part of town, getting older every year, needing more maintenance. Sometimes we tear them down, sometimes we add on, sometimes we remodel them. But and in Hawthorne in particular, and Lowell, there's a couple other schools that I just can't think of right now at the moment, but the demographics are changing. The demographics, with the economic situations in them, with the different ethnic groups that are in them, much more so accented in the last 15 years than they ever have before. And, it concerns me because I know a lot of kids are transient in those schools, the poverty thing, not having good meals. It all concerns me, and I was wondering, with this program, this thing that you just talked to us about, and obviously the school district is, has an interest in there. Are we formulating some sort of a long-term plan to deal with these things, the changing demographics in the central part of Sioux Falls?
I hope so.
You hope so? You don't. I see you're with
But
staff development.
Yes, I'm the staff development coordinator, but that is something Dr. Holman is passionate about, and I do know that she and Dr. Bill Smith and Mr. Jeff Kreider, they work together on that planning and zoning things. But the key for us, and my main focus, is to educate the staff, and that is the people who work in the lunchroom and the custodians and the teachers and the administrators on recognizing children from poverty and what we can do differently to help build those relationships, keep them in school, know that they're wanted, and so that they will graduate from our schools. But
Councilor Brown.
I believe Dr. Holman, and I don't want to speak for her because we could certainly bring her forth to talk about that, especially in regard to planning too, but I believe part of her plan is some of those schools you mentioned having a special emphasis, so it also attracts open enrollment into those elementaries. Maybe one school's concentrating on arts, one on math. Does that sound right, Tracy?
yeah, Lowell is now the Lowell Math Science Technology School. Phenomenal things happening there for the kids. Eugene Field is our A-plus school. Rosa Parks is the global language school. And so, having some specific focus so you can attract different kids to come to those through open enrollment.
But I know that down the city council we have the Pettigrew neighborhood, which is a project underway, and we've done a remarkable job so far coming there. The Whittier neighborhood, which is they've really pulled together as a neighborhood and done a lot of things, to make it more of a community. And I'm frankly worried about this part of Sioux Falls between Minnesota Avenue and Cliff Avenue that is south of 14th Street. I know the police calls are up in there, and I see what's going on. And, so we've got some areas in this town that, frankly concern me a lot. And along with that goes young kids that are going to school. So I'm glad that you came down here and made us a little bit more aware of something that I'm sure everybody's got in the back of their mind. But to see it put into, see it verbalized and see some of these numbers is I don't know if it's shocking to me, but it's certainly, like I said, sobering, and I appreciate you coming down here and informing us about this. So,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tracy. Any other questions of Tracy?
If you do, my contact information is on there. You can get a hold of me at any time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again for coming down. Okay, the next presentation we have is the Railroad Relocation Environmental Assessment Update, and we have Kevin Smith, who's the Assistant Director of Public Works, and Mike Cooper, who's the Director of Planning and Building Services. Mike's still here? Very good. Kevin, please.
Thank you. Let me see if I can get this up on the computer. Good afternoon, Kevin Smith with the Office of Public Works, and as Bob pointed out, Mike Cooper is also here from the Planning Department. It's been some time since we've been in front of the City Council to give you an update on the status of the Railroad Relocation Project. We thought today would be an opportune time, so I'd just like to quickly walk you through some slides, give you an overview of kind of where the project started, where we're at today, and where we hope to be in the next few months. Three main reasons the project was undertaken. First, to reduce driver delay and improve safety. Second, to enhance railroad operation efficiencies. And third, provide an opportunity for redevelopment in the downtown area. That stems mainly because we're trying to open up about 13 to 15 acres of area for redevelopment by moving the existing rail yard out of downtown Sioux Falls to a point in the northeast part of the city. To do that requires extensive environmental analyses, and we're going on our third year of the environmental assessment. In January of 2009, it'll be 3 years. So, as I just stated, the study area number one that I'll refer to in the presentation is out here. That is northeastern Sioux Falls along Rice Street, Timberline Road that goes up to Interstate 90 and the Big Sioux River and our wastewater treatment plant. Study area 2 is the downtown area. I think most people are particularly concerned about the trestle or the proposed changes down in the Falls Park area. And this just is a kind of a zoomed-in view of the two alternatives in the study area 1 location. Again, here is Rice Street. There's our wastewater treatment plant, there's the Big Sioux River, and here's Timberline Avenue going towards Interstate 90. And I'll just toggle back and forth between the alternatives. The difference in the northeast part of town is whether or not the new rail yard, and there's about 40,000 lineal feet of siding that would be constructed, whether it's built on the north and east side of the existing main line of BN or on the south and west side. And if I just flip back and forth, I think you can see the difference. So you can tell difference between alternative A and alternative B is just which side of the main line we would construct the new rail yard on. Drawbacks with this location are that we would have to do some realignment of Rice Street because we'd actually be getting much closer. And also, if you've ever been out that way, there's a main transmission line of Xcel Energy that would have to be relocated, and that would probably be a $2 million add-on to the project if we would go that direction. One of the concerns of the regulatory agencies going into this was if we built closer to the river, which is alternative A, that we may be impacting the floodplain. And if you've ever been out there, I think we've sufficiently answered those questions that no, we wouldn't be impacting the floodplain really in any significant way, because when it does flood out there, typically the land to the north of the river floods much more than the land towards Rice Street. And I've seen it out of its bank enough times to, I guess, anecdotally kind of prove that as well. The three alternatives we looked at in the downtown area have drawn a lot of public comment over the last several months. We've had now 4 public meetings to discuss the different alternatives. Study alternative A, which includes would include a new alignment paralleling Phillips Avenue, going through Sioux Steel, and then a new Y bridge on the east side of the river, directly across from Sioux Steel. Came out of the original study that was done in 2001, and through discussions with the park board and the public and adjoining property owners, no one was really crazy about this alternative. And if you drive now that Phillips to the Falls has actually been completed, if you drive down Phillips Avenue and then envision a new railroad running right alongside that new bike path, I think everyone would say, gee, that isn't really a good option. The folks from Burlington Northern also understand that having railroad right next to a bike trail, you're just inviting people to walk back and forth across it, and they weren't crazy about that one either. Alternative 2B would leave the existing trestle in place and would construct a new one directly adjacent to it, just kind of to the north. It would come across the falls, south of the Queen Bee Mill, and tie back into the main line that goes on out towards Corson. This is the one ultimately that the park board did recommend that we move forward with, and I'd say the vast majority of people who gave us any sort of written or verbal comments at the public meeting said they would support as well. And before I summarize, I'd just like to quickly show alternative C as well. This is somewhere in between alternative A and B, because we were asked, couldn't you look at moving the trestle further south than it is right now? And that's essentially what this would do. Still would have to parallel Phillips Avenue for a ways, and then come across the brownfields area and construct a new Y structure over the river, kind of on the south end of the falls. In order of magnitude, this is maybe as much as twice as much as the other two alternatives financially, because we'd have to build so much new structure, about half a mile's worth. And that's something that in our numerous discussions with the public and the Parks Board, we did point out that this project was originally envisioned at costing $40 million, and those were estimates based in 2001. We know we've had the funding rescinded down to $34 million, so we're not really motivated to look for more expensive alternatives as part of the project. This is, it could be constructed, but I think it would be at a tremendous cost. And by tremendous, I mean much, much more than the other two. Yes, Gerald?
Kevin, can you tell us, with alternative C, how much further south are you moving the railroad?
Maybe 200, 250 feet. And it would easily be in the tens of millions of dollars more than alternative 2B. And just as a point of history, we spent, I would say, about 9 months working through some of the comments of that we received from the park board, because they were clearly, and rightfully so, very concerned about the aesthetic impacts any of these alternatives would have to Falls Park. And these are just the three final alternatives that would be that are being evaluated in the environmental assessment. But we started with a universe of alternatives, one of which included a broad, sweeping curve that would go somewhere in the maybe 1,500-foot range into the existing residential area to the east. But we were asked to look for everything, look at every possible alternative. We did narrow it down to three. And at Park Board meeting in late October, they did endorse alternative 2B in the downtown area. Current status, we've had 4 public meetings. I think a few of the council members made it to the meeting we had in October. At that meeting, we had about 100 people, and I think we had 15 or 16 written comments, again, mostly in support of alternative 2B. Over the course of the last couple of public meetings, we've actually heard from folks from Brandon who are concerned about what it's going to do to traffic on Rice Street, and Mike Cooper and I will be meeting with the city council out there, hopefully in the short term, to tell them about the status of the project. But really, from our standpoint, we're down to two issues with the Federal Highway Administration, who has oversight over the environmental assessment process. First, they're requiring us to have a memorandum of understanding with Burlington Northern about the future of the land downtown. Who's going to own it? Are we going to trade them the new rail yard for all of the existing land downtown? They're concerned about the betterment issue. Is BN going to end up with something better than they have now? Well, I think our position is it's a functional replacement. We're moving their rail yard from the downtown area to the northeast part of town. The city of Sioux Falls is benefiting tremendously because of the removal of all the delays for downtown traffic, as well as the redevelopment opportunities that we're going to have for property taxes. When we did the original study in 2001, that's one of the things we keyed on in the economic development aspect, was not who owns it or what's going to be built there. It was more like, well, here's how much property value we stand to, or property tax revenue we stand to gain from by seeing somebody redevelop it. Federal Highway Administration has taken that to another level and said, well, we want answers to some of those questions before the environmental assessment gets completed. So we're continuing to work back and share some thoughts with BN on what could be included in a non-binding memorandum of understanding. Second issue that still remains is the need for additional borings downtown. And we've done 35 soil borings at their request on the BN rail yard, and all that we've found are some pockets of petroleum byproducts, but that's really not an issue that can't be easily mitigated. We didn't find things like coal tars or mercury or lead or anything that are real environmental problems. So the good side is, or the good thing is that the property is pretty clean environmentally. That just makes it more valuable to someone when it comes to redevelopment. But we've also been asked to perform some additional soil borings on another property north of there. Our hope is still to be through the process this winter, be into design next year, and hopefully at least be grading some of the new rail yard area by the end of 2009. But all of that none of that can be done until the environmental assessment is completed. And there will be one final public hearing when the document is done with some planning level cost estimates. But again, knowing that our original estimates from 7 years ago were at $40 million, we're looking for every way to save money and come up with creative design alternatives. But I can tell you, if we could bid it tomorrow, we'd get a tremendous price. Because of the bidding climate in the economy right now is very, very good if you're an owner bidding something. If we have to wait until September of 2009, it could be entirely different. And a great example is the price of fuel right now, that you can get gas for $1.49 a gallon when not all that long ago it was $4 a gallon. So I can't tell you exactly what it's going to cost, but I know what our original estimates were. We've worked through everything like the Topeka Shiner, the floodplain issues, spill protection, impacts to South Dakota 100, or what we would like to see constructed from South Dakota 100, and we feel very confident that we're very close to having the EA done. We've looked at some of the physical impacts to the Falls Park area where the construction would have to occur. We've worked through the concerns of the environmental agencies from a standpoint of contaminants. And also that brings us kind of now to the cultural resource aspect, which is visual in nature. So what we asked the consultant to do was to take some photos from key viewing locations at the falls and then superimpose where the new trestle would be to show people what the impact would likely be on the view shed. Yes, Gerald?
I have to ask, what's a Topeka shiner?
It's a minnow. When I was growing up, we would call it bait, but apparently now it's a threatened and endangered species, so
I thought it was a bar fight in Kansas.
it could be that too, or possibly Casper, Wyoming. But in our world, the Topeka shiner is an endangered species, so we've turned over every rock looking for potential impacts. So we looked at a couple of different locations, looking south from the viewing tower, looking south from pretty close to the Queen Bee Mill, and then looking south and east from the west side. So I'll just quickly walk you through those visuals. And I think this really does, it may not lessen the impact, but if you have questions about what is this thing really going to look like, this hopefully will explain it. Again, here, this was taken not today from the observation tower, but you can clearly see the current trestle, and we included two different styles of construction. One is concrete and the other is steel, so there will be different design alternatives.
This is current right now, Kevin?
Yes, and this one is a steel option for the bridge, and as you can see, we ask that they line up the piers, the supports for the proposed rail as closely as they could with the existing piers. So if you are standing on the observation tower and you look south, we want to essentially height it in front of the existing trestle, because people already know that one's there. And there's a couple different schools of thought. One is you draw attention to the new structure and make it stand out, or you try and have it blend in as much as you can with what's out there. So this is the blending alternative. And this is just the same thing, only with concrete construction and not steel on the superstructure. This is a shot taken on the east side of the falls, just south of the Queen Bee Mill, also looking south. And there's the steel option, and that would be the concrete option. And yes, there is going to be a visual impact by this project, or there would be at this location, but it is not as dramatic as I think some people believe it would be. And this one, there isn't a design alternative shown because the project would actually be on the other side of it, and you probably wouldn't see it. View number 4, this is taken from the observation tower in the southwest part of the park. That shows the steel option in place, and that one shows the concrete option in place. So railroads have to be essentially at the same grade no matter where you build the new facility. So it's not like it could physically even be 4 to 5 feet higher or lower than the existing rail. It all has to be at the same elevation. And we've just tried to match everything else up as closely as we could. This information was presented at the different, I think at the last public meeting. It's also been shown to the park board on a couple of different occasions, so they've kind of seen the same thing. And yes.
I keep thinking about like on going west on 12th Street, you go underneath the interstate bridge and how they have the concrete panels that are under there, and they look like the pink quartz side. Look like it's made out of block. Is that an option for this, or is it put too much cost onto it? I think that might help blend it in if that was a possibility.
One of the things we committed to with the park board is that as we move forward into design, that we would bring all of the designs back for their review and comment. So to the extent we can afford to do those things, we're certainly motivated to do that. We want it to look as nice as possible too, knowing that it is a railroad bridge. One thing I would like to point out is that, let me get back here. This being the preferred alternative that was supported by the park board, one of the things they asked is at somewhere where the existing berm is that really does separate Falls Park West from what I would say is the traditional known location of Falls Park, is is there a way to construct a pedestrian underpass through the existing berm? And that's something that even the Burlington Northern folks are supportive of, because their feeling is there's a lot of people who walk up the berm, walk across the tracks to get down to the other side of the onto the other side of the park. So anything they can do to eliminate that kind of crossing, get them through a pedestrian underpass, they're in favor of. So whether it would be, a very ornate structure, with a lot of, I'd say, architectural features to it, or something very simple and functional, is yet to be determined. But everybody included, especially the park board, has said that's very critical to us, that we have some connection between Falls Park West and the other portion of Falls Park.
Excuse me, Councilor Brown.
Kevin, I have several questions. Back to your first slide, the project purpose. The reduced driver delay, how much of a reduction are we talking about?
In the tens of thousands of hours, over cumulative
We've
over
studied
time.
this and have that documented?
The study does have it documented. I just don't have that information with me at the moment, but I'll get it for you, Vernon.
Okay. And then number of accidents today because of the railroad downtown, I'd be interested in that and what improvement we might see there as a result of this project. Is that something we have?
Yes, we can get that to you.
And then on your third point, opportunity for redevelopment, how many acres are we talking about downtown that can get redeveloped? Do you know?
I think the most conservative estimate was about 13 acres, but it could be as high as 20. And we've also got projections or estimates on what the property tax impacts would be of that redevelopment as well.
I'd like to see all those, please.
Kevin, does the railroad pay property tax on what's down there right now?
I don't believe they do.
Councilor Anderson?
Kevin, if you have the information, what's the difference, if any, between the steel design and the concrete design? I know both prices are probably going to be up there due to cost, but is there a big difference between either or?
No. I think it's just personal preference, and we asked a consultant to show both styles of construction just because of the visual difference of them. But I can tell you now, steel, the price of steel is way down.
It is down now.
Even the concrete structure would have steel inside it.
Yeah, it certainly, it would be steel reinforced. It just wouldn't be the steel exterior. And we showed both because the existing trestle has the steel exterior, so we thought we'd try and come up with an alternative that matched it.
Councilor Brown?
Because we know Falls Park is now the third largest tourist attraction in the state, can we be guaranteed that there won't be more increased rail traffic over those two bridges?
Well, one of the issues with rail traffic, especially there, and the reasoning behind building the Y bridge is so that they don't have to stop and park cars across the river, which they do now from time to time. That the only time you would see their trains going through is when they're moving, not when they're backing up and using them to store them, or when they're building unit trains. So I don't know what the future of rail traffic is in South Dakota, but this is part of the state core line, so I think it is possible that we'll see additional rail traffic sometime in the future, but the switching, the building and breaking of trains won't take place in the downtown area. You'll only see them as they're moving through Sioux Falls, not having them stop and occupy the right-of-way.
So today, we don't have any agreement to keep them from parking over the falls on the existing bridge?
No. They're able to do that sort of unimpeded at their own decision.
Councilor Benniga?
I guess this is just a broad-based question, but are we making progress at all with the neighbors in the north part of town with the relocation issues that they're talking about, and where are we kind of with the progress with Sioux Steel?
Actually, we've been working very closely with the owner of Sioux Steel over the last couple of years with this project, because I think they're looking at some economic development opportunities of their own in the future. As far as the impacted landowners where the new rail yard would be located, we've had a few meetings with them, and they've been actually pretty favorable.
So you can say we're making progress?
Absolutely.
Positive progress?
Positive progress, both in the downtown area and in the northeast part for acquisition of property.
Councilor Anderson.
Kevin, you stated earlier in the presentation, too, that there was some concerns about Highway 11 and then Rice Street going out there by Brandon residents.
Sure.
What are you going to say to them as far as the impact out there?
Well, one of the things, after the public meeting, we had a follow-up meeting with BN officials, and it wasn't their right-of-way people, it was their operation and maintenance individuals. And what we talked to them about was this crossing specifically. This is a future crossing of the extension of Benson Road that would go over Rice Street and then ultimately tie into South Dakota 100. This is the crossing the folks from Brandon are most concerned about, that their commuters wouldn't be stuck in traffic waiting to get into town or going back home. So what we said, all right, we'll talk to the BN design people, and you have to take this, you have to understand, we haven't done any design engineering on this, and we're prohibited from doing that by the federal government until the environmental assessment's done. So these are all just 10,000-foot level discussions. That any way we can move this as far to the north and east and not impact Rice Street by the train crossings there, whether it's the movement of trains as they're coming through town or as they're doing their switching operations, something we said, geez, we really need to work with you on operationally. And they said, okay, when we get to the point of design, maybe there's a way we can do that so we lessen the number of times they have to cross this.
Now, is that the same area as where Rice Street actually starts curving east towards Brandon? And then there's also that highway that goes north across 90?
Yeah,
Is
here-
that same section?
This is the segment that goes north towards Interstate 90. This is Timberline Avenue. And here's Rice Street as it starts curving towards Brandon. There is this is the existing crossing out there. And it does get occupied from time to time by trains as they're passing through. I think the concern of the Brandon folks was as they're doing their switching operations, would there be additional impacts to the traveling public? And the best answer we could give them and the best answer I can give you now is through the design process and operation, once it's done, that's something that we're going to encourage of BN as well, is to move all of that traffic as far north as possible so they're not running back and forth across Rice Street, except as they're going through.
How is it going to impact that road that goes north then across 90?
Well, that's
The way it's designed at this time?
If Burlington Northern were here, they'd probably tell you they would like that crossing closed immediately when the new switching yard opens. But our position is that's a main connection to Interstate 90, and until such time that South Dakota 100, maybe I can show it to you better here. Here's the alignment to South Dakota 100, this blue line. Until this is completed, that connection on Timberline Avenue is still necessary. Someday Timberline Avenue can be abandoned when South Dakota 100 is built. Until that time, Timberline Avenue has to stay open. So we talked about alternative uses of gate closures, even some back accesses in the interim, so we don't have to permanently close it. And they seemed pretty reasonable. The BN folks seemed like they would be willing to consider that. But I think our original plan, Kenny, was to have the state build South Dakota 100 in conjunction with this, so it wasn't an issue. So the crossing could have gone away, but we know it's going to be at least a few years before they get South Dakota 100 built. So we need to do something with Burlington Northern in the interim to get us there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Kevin? Okay. Kevin, thank you very much for your presentation today. Looking at the next item on our agenda here, it's executive session to discuss a personnel item. So I would need a motion to adjourn into executive session.
So moved, Costello.
Costello moves. Need a second?
Second, Anderson.
Anderson seconds. All those in favor of adjourning into executive session, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we stand adjourned into executive session. I would ask that anybody not intimately, we're going to go into the big room, and then anybody that's not intimately involved with these discussions will have to clear the area, and thank you for doing that.